Heya! So today I'm going to be casting in place with tiny little black spinel. The black spinel was found in Tasmanian rivers by a friend of mine who goes fossicking. He sent me a bunch, so I had some fun to do in lockdown. I'm going to be using a vertical flask for this one, and I'm going to be casting all these little stones in place in just a plain band. Let's get to it. Let's just run through the tools I use in my tutorials. So I'm using a vertical flask, which is a modified horizontal flask. I'm using Delft clay. I'm using talcum powder that I've got in a little container. I'm using a knifey tool, some pawpaw ointment, fine nose tweezers, a sharp pokey thing, a fat pokey thing, a steel ruler, a straw, a paintbrush, a hammer, bolt cutters, a dumping dish, and a little ramekin to hold all of my stones. And I'll show you how to use all of those tools in this video. I've got my vertical flask, which was just a horizontal flask, but I've cut out a square to be my registration. Something you can do at home if you wanted to. Always start with the male half first, lip face down, pack it from behind. We do this to protect the flask because if we're hitting the flask lip with a hammer, we'll eventually damage it so much that the two halves won't fit together. So this is just giving your flask a little bit longer life. We're using a hammer to compress that clay. And we've got our steel ruler to scrape off that excess clay because we want this surface to be flush. If you've got cracks in your surface like that, not a problem. Just go back in there with a bit of clay and repair those cracks. You can even compress it a little bit more. Okay, so we've got a workable surface. Get your talcum powder and paint it on. This talcum powder acts as a barrier between the two clay halves to stop them sticking together. It also helps your object come out of the clay a lot easier. You don't have to use baby powder. You can use just regular baking flour. Got my ring. Put it in the flask. I'm going to push that into about halfway. And I'm going to put the lid on. So put the female on top, lining up that registration mark. In this case, it's the square that I've cut out. Get some loose, crumbly bits of clay, pack that in there and use your fingers to push it tightly around your object, making sure you're picking up all that detail. And then you can just grab handfuls of clay and jam it in there. And let's scrape that excess clay off. The ruler is also great for clearing your workspace. Let's pull that apart gently. You don't want to screw it open, you want to pull it apart nice and gently. Let's get that ring out. Some objects are easier to get out than others. Let's carve a funnel. It's really simple with the vertical flask. Got my knifey tool and I'm just cutting a V. And I'll use the back of my paintbrush to squash down all of that loose clay, just like a little rolling pin. And I'm going to get my object, I'm going to put it back into that space to clean up those loose bits of clay that I just pushed into the negative space. Nice. And let's do the same to the other side. Little triangle. And clean it up. Back of the paintbrush. and put that object back in to clean up that negative space. Now we're ready to place some stones. I've got my fine nose tweezers, I've got some pawpaw ointment, and I've got some stones. I've got the pawpaw ointment so that I can gently adhere the stones in place. Just a little suggestion for them to stay put exactly where I place them. It doesn't have to be pawpaw ointment, it could be any sort of Vaseline style goop that incinerates when heated up. Alright, I put a little bit of pawpaw on this rough black spinel, and now I'm going to lay it inside of this flask. I'm laying it inside of that design. And I'm just giving it a gentle push so that it's kissing that clay wall. So anywhere that the stone is touching the clay, that's the part of the stone that you'll be able to see in the silver version. I'm not sure if you can see inside of that flask to see where I've placed that stone on that vertical wall. I'm going to add all of the stones to one side because I want to have sort of like a corrosion style look, like the ring is ancient and kind of falling apart a little bit. It's the look I'm going for. We'll see if it happens. A little bit of pawpaw. Let's place the stone in that flask. Pretty much going to cram a bunch of these little black spinels inside of this design. I actually do want some of them to stop the silver from flowing properly, so that I get this half-formed sort of relic looking ring. Okay, so I've really piled those stones in there. Can you see them all crammed up against that vertical wall? I'm going to put an air vent at the bottom of this, just like that, poking all the way out. Open that air vent up a little bit again, just to make sure it's absolutely there and going to stay open. The idea of putting my air vent down the bottom here is because the metal is going to shoot in here, go around this finger section and crash and meet in the middle. And I really want to make sure that as that air is evacuating out of the hole, it's drawing that metal down and crashing and meeting right here. So we've got a complete casting. Let's close this up and cast. Safety glasses on. Got my mini Smith torch, turning on my LPG gas, igniting it, probably getting a better lighter, introducing some oxygen, then gas and oxygen until I've got a really big, angry flame. Alright. Dominant hand is always on the crucible handle because you need to make sure you're constantly in control of what's happening with this molten metal. The hottest part of the flame is about 2 centimeters away from that bright blue tip. I always guess how much metal I need and then I'll double it, because it's good to have about 10 grams more than what you actually need, because that extra weight will force your metal down into the flask and hopefully complete your casting. That silver's looking good. It's rolling around like water. And it's got a mirror finished surface, or it looks like mercury. So let's bring it on over to our flask. I'm resting that crucible against the flask. I've got the torch focused on the lip of my crucible because I need to heat that up. I'm about to pour some metal over it, and I'm also simultaneously keeping that metal piping hot. I'm going to dump the metal down the hole. I'm not going to pour it, I'm going to dump it. And while I do it, I'm going to make sure that that flame stays on the metal so that the metal is as hot as it can be. 1, 2, 3. Turning it off. This is a good time to put your mask on. Gets a bit smoky. Now this flask may be hot because that molten metal was touching that aluminium flask. So always just be a little bit tentative. Don't just go grabbing your flask believing it's going to be cool, because sometimes it won't be. But I do know that that clay is cool enough to touch. So let's pop that down. Yeah, flask is not too hot. Let's leave this open and have a look at this ring. Pretty excited to see what it looks like. All right. So I was hoping to go for a bit of like corroded, half-formed silver band, but I've just gone and completely set those stones in their cast in place style. And that's what I love about the sand casting process, is you can have an idea in mind, but whether it's going to come out like that or not is really hard to tell. So I find I try not to hold on to my design ideas too strongly. I try to embrace what comes out of the clay and work with that. Let me show you cleaning out this flask after you've cast. So I've got my little bin. Got my hot, fresh casting. Don't ever quench your castings with stones, because the stones will go into thermoshock and they will shatter. So any castings with stones, let them cool down naturally. So any burnt bits of clay we can't reuse. So we've got to get rid of them. So I like to be able to just scrape that burnt stuff out and then reuse the rest. Just like that. So don't be overzealous when getting out the burnt clay, because you'll go through your Delft clay really quickly that way. So get out most of the worst bits of burnt clay, but if there's a little bit left in there, that's okay. Now that the casting's cool enough to touch, let's cut this big sprue off with our bolt cutters. Aren't they fantastic? Make sure if you get them, get this articulated arm. It's like power steering for bolt cutters. Now I can reuse that button for my next casting. Alright, so I did get some shattered black spinels, which is the risk you take when you're using material that isn't sapphires, rubies or diamonds. But it was a cool little project to do with you guys. I'll probably do it again, but this time maybe using these tiny little baby sapphires from Tasmania. The sapphires are more likely to be cast in place without breaking. So I won't be cleaning this one up because it's got about 3 of the black spinels have broken. It's not really worth cleaning up and salvaging. Sometimes you've got to decide how much work is going to go into saving something and if it's better just to start again. And I think in this case, just to start again. And I'm going to say this is a prototype. So it's a good sort of practice to get into, to not be too precious with your creations, because otherwise you'll be too afraid to do anything. And not to waste too much time on a piece that it's not worth it. Like, don't go flogging a dead horse, as they say. So I'm going to do the same sort of technique again, but with sapphires this time, knowing that the sapphires are more likely to be cast in place without shattering. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope it's informative for you. Like and subscribe, because if I get enough subscribers and views, YouTube will pay me to make content for you guys, which you get to view for free. So it's a win-win situation. If you'd like to see anything in particular, leave a comment and let me know, because I like to make videos for you guys and what you want to see. All right, until next time, bye.